This week on Writers, Inc.
Often when we think of characters that are relatable or somebody that would become popular or somebody people, like I say, a lot of people's ambition, it's like, I want to write the character that somebody would dress up at a con or something like that. Sure. There are a couple of tricks you can use, as it were, because I don't have any issue with cheating. I mean, writing is mind control after all. You use every trick in the book. But one that comes up a lot is the Save the Cat concept, which made popular by the book Save the Cat, where you have the character do something very admirable or noble early on, but there are lots of ways to implement it that aren't so obvious, like standing up for the less fortunate or inconveniencing yourself for the sake of somebody you don't have to be inconvenienced for.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie on a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories. All have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out. School's in session. This is Writers, Inc.
Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
I'm Jena Brown.
And I'm Kevin Tumlinson.
And JD is away this week in Walt Disney World with his kiddo.
Lucky.
Sent me a picture yesterday from Epcot having a cerveza. So I think he's having a good time.
Very good. That's the way to do it. Does anyone else remember a time when you couldn't get alcohol at Disney World?
No.
Okay. I'm that old. I am that guy.
And did you have something you wanted to talk about, Kevin, this week?
Other than the news coming up, I did, last week I really wanted to announce my new book coming up. So I'm going to take advantage of this moment. And I have a new novel in my Dan Kotler archaeological thrillers called The Forgotten Rune. That's releasing May 15th. And you can pre-order it now at, actually, if you just go to my website, if you go to kevintumlinson.com/books, it's very prominently promoted right at the top. So go check it out.
Awesome.
All
right. Kevin, what's in the news?
In the news, we have we got a smorgasbord for you here, but a couple of quick ones we want to get through. First, Janet Reed has died. Longtime literary agent and generous creator of Query Shark. Janet Reed, her client, Alison K. Williams, wrote, long before we worked together, her blog and Query Shark educated me about querying, publishing, and writing.
Yeah.
He was a generous advice giver who truly listened to writers at all stages.
Mm-hmm.
That is pretty sad news. I've read quite a few of her tweets and things. Query Shark is kind of a staple, so it'd be sad to see that go.
That's like one of the first things when you start asking about, what do I need to know about querying? Like everyone sends you to that website. And it really is like very good. Like if you go through and start reading every single post on her query letters, like at the end of it, it's impossible not to have a better query letter.
Yeah, there's a lot of information on there. It is sad, yeah. But I used that when I was a baby author to begin my query journey.
That's very sad.
Lots of great advice.
Yeah, I hope they keep her website up, not just for the information, but, just so that she can continue to make an impact with new writers.
I hope so, too. Yeah.
Yeah, we need an archive of that kind of stuff, actually. Someone needs to be a curator of all that. Well, if you thought the sad news ended there, I'm sorry to tell you. Don Winslow has not died, and that's the good news, but he is saying goodbye. So he announced his retirement last year. His final book just released, and he will be riding off into the sunset. Don Winslow. We've had him on this show, right?
I think so. I think that's right. Yeah. So that's, end of a career. That's always sad news.
I lose track of the people we have on the show because because I'll talk to some of these same people on other podcasts. So, and I know I've talked to Don a few times. I don't know if I was the one who's interviewed him on this show, but he'll be missed. But he's going on to other things, and he's hinting at getting super political. I don't know if he was kidding about that or if he's serious about that. I hope he doesn't do that.
We'll find out.
Yeah, well, I mean, he kind of writes like that crime fiction genre. It makes sense that he would be interested in, some sort of activism role. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I suppose it's, like anything, like there's
Yeah.
too much of a good thing or too much of a bad thing. But, he's got a platform and he has a voice. And so if he can use it to instigate good, then more power to him.
What I don't get though is how does a writer retire? I don't understand that
You stop
concept at
writing.
all. I don't. I mean, yeah. Okay, so I the way I see it happening for me is like one day they come and find my like stiffened corpse,
Yeah.
leaning over a keyboard. Like I don't know how you do that. So I guess I won't be seeing him anymore on the conference circuit or anything.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but if I do see him again, I'm going to ask him.
Maybe he wants to, I mean, we'll still write. Maybe that's what the, act, maybe he'll be getting more into like nonfiction or, just doing something else, I don't know, but maybe he also just wants to not write. I mean, he might still write, but maybe not write for profit, to like publish.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We'll see.
It's kind of an interesting thought.
Don, if you're listening, we have questions. Let's get you on the show. All right, let's get to the news. How about that? We got an update. Biden signed sell or ban TikTok law. A few months ago, it seemed unlikely the U.S. government would force ByteDance, the Chinese company that owns TikTok, to sell it. Congress rarely passes legislation aimed at a single company, yet a bipartisan TikTok bill packaged with aid for countries impacted by war is now on its way to becoming law. The Senate passed the measure 79-18 3 days after the House passed it, 360 to 58. It has now been signed by President Biden. If ByteDance does not sell TikTok within 12 months, it will be banned in the United States. I can tell you this. I don't like TikTok. I don't trust TikTok. But there is no way I would allow the United States to tell me what I can and can't do with my company. I would never sell it. Is that obstinate of me?
Well, no, I sort of think that's like actually very American of you. I don't know. I know that it's very complicated, and I know that there's been a lot of like spy concerns.
Yeah.
But I guess if we're honest, like, didn't Meta get in trouble for like sort of working with companies that were essentially doing the same thing, and they didn't force Zuckerberg to sell? I don't know. It's very strange. I can't help but feel like there's obviously some layer of agenda that perhaps we're not fully seeing somewhere in this TikTok war.
Yeah, always more information. But I don't know, like, I haven't gotten that into TikTok. I was using it for a while and then I kind of fell off, but I kind of fell off all my social media just because I'm overwhelmed with so many platforms and I just don't have that time to write instead of spending time on social media. But this kind of stuff dancing around it really has kept me off of TikTok because I'm like, well, they're going to ban it anyways. Why am I going to put effort into building on that platform? So I don't know. It's going to be kind of interesting to see. Yeah.
Right. And the reason this matters, I mean, we have, Book Talk is such a huge deal and such a huge influencer. I mean, we have another story coming up that also that included some mentions of Colleen Hoover, and that's how she has risen, as rapidly as she has is through Book Talk. So, I mean, this does have an impact on our community and more. I mean, there's other industries that are swayed by the Book Talk tides, I guess. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, that's true. But there's always something new, right? Because it was Facebook and then Twitter and then Instagram and then TikTok. And there's always something new that's, if you're an early adopter, you can use that to kind of promote yourself. But yeah, I don't know. I know.
Twit Talk Face Tube coming up next.
But there was a lot of stock. I don't know if there's been any change in book talker influences, because it used to be just passion. They just did it because they love books, and now people are getting paid more and more, so people are kind of more hesitant to take that advice a little bit, I think. But I don't know. Maybe it's still a huge mover. Maybe people will just use a VPN and nobody will care about the ban. So we'll see.
That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see. I don't know. I feel like this is one of those instances where it's like it's what they say is going on, but there's something else going on, and the end result is not going to be at all what people expect. Maybe I write too much fiction, but that's
No, there's always I'm like, when I have questions, it's either because I'm missing information or the answer is money. So maybe it's one of those two things. I don't know.
or both. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
for sure, I kind of feel like, no one cared when Mark Zuckerberg essentially stole stories from Snapchat. And didn't make, but I guess, TikTok, even with Reels, maintained its competition. And I don't know, kind of feels like maybe that has something to do with it.
Well, moving on. Let's forget about TikTok because it's going away. I'm convinced. HarperCollins is collaborating with 11 Labs to produce audiobooks for its foreign language titles, focusing on deep backlist series books that might not otherwise be converted into audio format. 11 Labs uses advanced AI to convert text to speech. They have rapid production of audiobooks with the capability to generate an audiobook in about an hour, while HarperCollins plans to continue using human voice actors for many of its audiobooks. The AI technology is seen as a complementary tool that will help increase the number of titles available in audio format, particularly for markets outside of English-speaking regions. That's, by the way I see audiobook narration. And I'll say this too, add this, the whole idea here should be that we're going to use AI to generate these audiobooks, and if they're doing well, we're going to fold money into hiring and producing the human narrated version. That's something indie authors should do, and I think it's something that HarperCollins and others should do because it engages it's a low overhead way to gauge interest in the audio. That's my take anyway.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, right? Going human, I think, should always be the goal. I always do think there's going to be a different market for AI listeners and human listeners. So I think you want to have the biggest audience you can and hit both of those markets. I just want to mention that this was sent in by a listener. So thanks, Sam. Sam wanted us to talk about that. We appreciate it.
Sam.
I think it's an interesting thing too, to be able to get it to more countries, because, translation is always an issue. And if you can, do that, which I imagine might actually even help with getting print translations done. If you are able to quickly produce an audio translation and it does well in that country, then publishers might be inclined to help broaden print base too. So I like everything. There's a good and a bad, right? Double-edged sword.
We should keep in mind too. 11 Labs has a whole system where people can actually basically lease their voice to these things. Like they can get paid a royalty for the use of their voice. I think HarperCollins would be wise to do that, but here's the way I see it. Like pay guys like, what are some of the, I can't remember, all their names escape me right now, but all these like popular narrators, pay them like huge sums to license their voice and not allow anyone else to have it.
Like Will Wheaton, right? Isn't he huge? Doesn't Will Wheaton have a huge audiobook following? I believe he does.
I think he does, but knowing Will Wheaton the way I do, he's going to be so viscerally opposed to this that he'd never do it. Like you could probably offer him $1 million a year to do it, and he'd object and curse at you, and so. But I mean, there's a lot of narrators out there that they are in high demand. If they were to sign a special deal, because they're not going to be able to do this forever, so why not franchise yourself and safeguard yourself. And so your voice becomes, this eternal thing that can continue to profit you. And, you do the right deal and that it goes to your estate, just like an IP. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this. I would like to see systems like that start to evolve, because human narration is amazing, but AI narration is getting better and better all the time. So we might as well figure out the best possible ways to leverage it.
And this is the worst it'll ever be, right? It's only getting better. And I'm always, when it's giving books that didn't have a chance, more of a chance, that's always the upside, right? So that's cool.
Yeah, exactly. How many books there are out there that don't have audiobook versions because the overhead of producing one was just too high, and that's largely on the indie scale, but it's not entirely indie. That's also in TradPub there are books that don't have audio. So
yeah, there are quite a few.
Yeah. What I think is coming, and this is the last I'm going to say on it before we go to the next news thing, but what I think is coming is a bespoke service that allows just like I can go on my Kindle and enlarge fonts and change fonts and things like that. I promise you at some point someone's going to come up with a way for us to download the audiobook or download an ebook version or whatever and choose the audio narrator we want for it. So
that's an interesting thought, because I know and I won't mention any titles, but I know that I have had books that like I've loved and I've read, and then I've told my friends, and then they've been like, oh, I couldn't, but they were listening to the audio, and then I listened to the sample and was like, oh, like that was not the tone. Like, it just, having read the book, I was like, man, and I know that there's a lot of thought and a lot of, care that goes into that. But when it comes to like what the vision was versus how it translates for the reader, sometimes that's a miss, and that can affect, if I hadn't read the book and been like, no, I promise you will love this book, read the physical copy, they would have never gone forward with it. And so being able to like maybe adjust that, that would be interesting to see how that affects.
There's no way that's
even
not
like regional accents, sometimes there's like things that are in like a thick brogue or something, and I'm like, I'm struggling with this. I mean, it's true to the book, but it makes it difficult for me to listen to, right?
Right.
So, so that's interesting.
Yeah. That's an interesting thought. I never actually thought about that.
Yeah. Get your own regional accent, right? Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yes. This last story was kind of a late entry, but we're going to run through it because it was fascinating. But no one buys books. If that's coming as a shock to you, keep listening. The author L. Griffin compiled the trial data. That's the book, The Trial. Data from the Big Five, testimony to the Department of Justice. He states that the business model of big publishers involves significant investment in celebrity and franchise authors who command large advances, reflecting a focus on guaranteed bestsellers. Publishers depend on a few successful titles to cover the costs of many that do not turn a profit. Unless you're a celebrity or a franchise author, the publishing model won't provide a whole lot more than a tiny advance and a dozen readers. The market dynamics are shifting, with digital platforms and self-publishing allowing authors more direct access to their audiences. Platforms like Amazon and Kickstarter are changing how books are sold and read, increasingly sidelining traditional publishers, especially in genre fiction like romance, where many authors have moved to self-publishing. The author states, that the publishing houses may live to see another day. She doesn't think their model is long for this world. This article was kind of mind-boggling to me, because I already knew a lot of this, but it was like hearing someone say the quiet part out loud. Like, all this stuff is happening, but to actually see it sort of coming out in the course of that trial. Like, even my wife, who has no interest in the publishing industry at all, found this article completely enlightening and fascinating.
Did you follow along with the trial when it was happening?
Somewhat.
I'm about to reveal my very nerdy ways. Like, I was obsessed. I was like following along with the live tweets. I was like in it when they were, releasing all so a lot of this wasn't new to me. I do think that I mean, yes, it's saying the quiet part out loud, but I also think it's an interesting interpretation of data.
Yeah, you were mentioning this earlier, so tell me what you meant by that.
Well, I just think, some of the data, I think, is presented in a way that because it's compiled with the Penguin Random House trial makes you think that all of this information came from traditional publishing. And I don't actually think that's true. I think a lot of it, as far as the sales go, as far as like the units,
Yeah.
was also including a lot of indie publishing, which I do think skews the data because those titles are going to sell less. So I don't know. I come from a very strong business background, and there isn't a business functioning in the world right now that doesn't operate under the Pareto principle, which is,
Yeah.
80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. And so whether that's a product, whether that's people, like it doesn't matter. It all comes down to that. So to think that publishing would be any different is interesting because it is also a business.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't think that that's the lesson we really should take from it, though, is that because looking at like the things that struck me, one of the biggest was like looking at the advances that they pay these celebrity authors and these franchise authors
yeah.
compared to their sales was kind of from a business person's perspective.
Well,
It just shows that this whole system is dumb. Like it's just dumb. Like why you're going to lose money on that. It's
I don't
dumb.
know if
yeah.
I agree with that actually. I think it's actually smart, and I think that's why they do that because it generates publicity and it gets people in bookstores, whether they realize it or not, and it puts
Okay, I have a counter.
Well, I have an additional before you counter. I think part of it though too is that those publishing houses want to keep that that author in their publishing house, because if they don't give them the advance they want, they are going to go to the other publishing houses who will give them the advance that they want. So that's part of the factor as well.
that's also true.
Okay,
Yeah.
counter it, Kevin. Go.
Okay, so here's my counter. Let them leave. Let them leave. Here's what I guarantee you, I promise you that if any given one of the big five were to follow this next strategy, they can modify it to taste, but if they were to go and instead of giving, $10 million to this celebrity or even 250 grand to this guy, go and find the indie authors who already have a large platform and give them even a third of that money as a marketing budget. And then I also think that they should be making all advances contingent on pre-orders and pre-sales. Like you hit certain numbers in pre-orders and pre-sales, you get a certain amount of advance before the book even launches. You do that, and you see a lot more participation from these authors with big platforms, first of all, who often don't know anything about marketing. So, they'd have to hire people. They'd use that money wisely, I'd hope. But to me, the opportunity here is these publishers could be making a lot more money from the IP that they acquire, the back catalogs that they acquire from authors who are already out there and establishing themselves, rather than constantly gambling on celebrities. That's my counter.
I guess
Pick apart.
well, it is interesting because it is, obviously business, there's a lot of different strategies that you can take. I think, they're hoping that a celebrity will sell, like Prince Harry, broke the world, right, with his memoir. The Obamas had incredible sales, and so, like Christine said, they want to keep that author within their publishing house and keep them happy. So it is always a risk. Do they pay them too much? Sometimes, probably, yes. But they also, have like a lot of those big advances with fiction that they talked about in the trial that also, like they said, not a big advance doesn't guarantee a bestseller. And one of the things, and I don't think they brought it up in this article, but when they were talking about the data and the sales in the trial, one of the things that they said, which is again, something I think a lot of us already knew, is that, a bulk of their profits come from their backlist and their midlist titles. And so, you do have quite a lot of people out there that are generating sales. And when you look at a lot of really popular authors, like Holly Black, I think is a good example. I think that it was like her 9th book that was published before she became a bestseller. And so she didn't start off with big advances. And she is now one of their staples. Same with Colleen Hoover. So I think like it's a hard thing. Like platform doesn't always equal sales, as they've learned with celebrity. And you just never really know when a book is going to resonate with an audience. And I think that's kind of why they have the structure that they have, but I do agree with what you said and what was said in the article about different platforms disrupting publishing. Now, publishing is a big, giant behemoth of a business, and when that happens, they tend to get very entrenched in their ways, and those ways tend to be slightly antiquated, and, it's like a big ship is hard to turn, and I do think that they miss the boat on a lot. Which is why romance and horror, flourish as an indie and now are starting to come back. But it took, 5 years for indie sales to really start to, for publishing to be like, oh, maybe we're missing out on an opportunity here. So I don't know if they're gonna die. I don't know if, I don't know if I would reach the same conclusion that they're not long for this world.
I think it's true. I think it's true. But here, regardless of everything else, though, I will say this: the one like shining hope that came out of that whole article for me was that I outsell Piers Morgan. That's the only fact in that article that I really care about.
Oh gosh, it is an in-depth article, so I would suggest people who are interested go read the whole thing.
Definitely check it out. All right, well, that is the news.
When you're writing a book, the first draft is the easy part. It's what comes after that hurts. The confusion, the self-doubt, questioning this, questioning that, trying to get feedback so you can feel confident making changes. It's a lot to handle, and that's why I'm delighted to say that this episode of the Writers Inc. podcast is sponsored by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that can make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. From start to finish, everything you need to produce a strong, confident story is at your fingertips. Get instant developmental feedback on plot, conflict, characters, themes, and more through the Story Analyzer. And edit each sentence to perfection with a complete interactive editing suite packed with reports and insights. And that's not to mention additional benefits like private community forums and live members-only support and writing sessions every single week. It's an incredible place to be for any writer. And listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can take advantage of lifetime AutoCrit Pro membership for one single payment. That's right, no renewal fees. Head to autocrit.com/JD to get yourself a lifetime membership now. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show.
So up this week, it is Daniel Kaplan. Daniel is a writing tutor with AutoCrit, and he runs all kinds of fantastic workshops for authors. So looking forward to hear what tips he has for us to improve our writing and our characters.
Well, Daniel, thank you for joining us. Now you're with AutoCrit. That happens to be a sponsor of the show. That's just pure coincidence. You're here You're here because we're going to talk about how to make dynamic characters. I can't wait to dive into that. But let's start first with AutoCrit. And our listeners may or may not be familiar with AutoCrit. They've hopefully heard the spots that are running, done by a guy with just a remarkable, wonderful voice. And we've also had other AutoCrit folks on the show in the past. But why don't you give us a real quick rundown of what AutoCrit is and what your role is there?
Yes, AutoCrit has grown so much since we got started doing this. We really want to be the home for writers, and we want to be that assistant that takes you through the writing process from start to finish. And so at the heart of AutoCrit is our writer's desk. So that is our full suite of software. It includes things like the story builder, which helps you brainstorm and outline your ideas. The main writer's desk with a bunch of reports to help you do line editing, like figuring out your adverb use, or if you're using filler words or things like that. We also have some newer features maybe you're not as familiar with, like the story analyzer, which goes through chapter by chapter, and it's like having a virtual beta reader with you that's just looking at things, giving you your synopsis, whether or not perhaps you have plot conflicts, things like that.
Hmm.
And that's even being expanded soon, which is one reason I wanted to talk about characters, because I've been doing a lot of research into characters
Yeah.
because I've been helping build the engine for our character analysis that we're going to have soon. And it's going to help you see the arcs of your characters, whether or not you've left unfinished business, you can get more mileage out of the conflicts. But, that's the heart of AutoCrit. In addition to that, we have our academy, where I and others lead a lot of workshops and courses about genres and specific tools of the trade. And then we have a community of fellow authors always on hand to help out. And we have some live club sessions as well that we do on a weekly basis, like the accountability club and things like that. We
Excellent.
there's a lot there to dive into. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
always exciting.
there's always so much. There's just it's a pretty powerful tool. I know JD uses it and I've kind of tinkered around with it. I haven't, I don't know. When it comes to things that are supposed to help me with the craft part of the writing, I don't know. I'm so picky.
No, it's tough. It's really tough. I mean, that's the one thing that we get with that I love about the writer's desk, right? Is that
Yeah.
it's not like one of those tools that you put it in there and then you hit a button and it does everything for you, right?
Yeah.
It's suggestions. Like we
Yeah.
we really try to keep to our name, AutoCrit. So it's giving you critiques, it's giving you suggestions, but the final say is always in the hands of the author.
That's what crit stands for. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's dive into what the whole point of this interview though, because we want to talk about characters and I I have a character that is kind of he's I call him an Indiana Jones type and he's one that I've developed over the course of years like about a decade of writing at this point. Maybe it would have been better, easier, faster if I'd had something like AutoCrit. But what's the let's start with like the foundational stuff. Like what makes a good character or a dynamic character even?
Yeah, well, I mean, it does come to that dynamic that tends to work, right? If you have a character, it's a bit of a catch-22, especially with something like what you're doing, right? Where it's a long series, I'm guessing
Yeah.
multiple books. Yeah. So the challenge, of course, when you have something like that is you do not want the character to completely stagnate because then you're giving the audience the same experience every time. And
Yeah.
on the other hand, if they dramatically transform every book, well, by book seven, like what even are they anymore,
Right.
right?
Right.
But it is important that you have a certain amount of dynamics, just like with music or anything else, right? You don't want just a monotone, you don't want just the same rhythm, you want it to change. And so what I usually ask people, from the beginning is just very basic questions, right? Like what motivates them? What's their goal in life? What's keeping them from their goal? And that could be a reoccurring antagonist, or that could be just the antagonist for that book. They actually get that goal and then they move the goalposts, right, to something else. It
Right.
really depends on the kind of series you're doing. But the important thing is that they are moving somewhere, right? And they're moving somewhere beyond just the requirements of the plot. If they're just sitting around on their couch waiting for their plot to show up, then that's like the kind of people in life that don't go jump into action unless there's something on fire.
Yeah.
We really like to rally behind the people that don't need that. Like, I'm not saying they make the fire. Sometimes they
I
do.
make the fire. I end up making
But
the
it's
fire.
more like they're gonna go out and go looking for fires, right?
Yeah.
They're not just gonna sit around waiting for their house to catch on fire, right? They're gonna try to help other people's from catching a fire. Anyway, I'm torturing that metaphor, but you get the idea.
Yeah. You're burning the metaphor, right?
Right.
So
Torching it.
torching the metaphor. So, okay, but where does that start? Like, because we've got, unfortunately, I feel like sometimes I'm the guy sitting around waiting for the plot. But I don't want my characters to feel like that. So
Right.
what's a starting point there? Like, how do you get that ball rolling?
Well, I mean, you do need to ask yourself, like, usually it's what is not right with their life right this moment, right? If
Okay.
they were either that, well, okay, I'm going to second guess myself because it doesn't have to be that way, but generally, well, and we'll do the exceptions. Generally, the character would start out and there's at least something we can identify, even if the character can't identify it themselves,
Yeah.
that could be better, right? And then usually the inciting incident, the call to adventure, whatever you call that story hook, where the plot really gets going, is where something in the environment changes or they're given an opportunity, something to that effect that allows them to actually, do something about this problem.
Yeah.
So they don't necessarily, I mean, they can essentially be like sitting on the couch minding their own business to a certain extent, but you need to feel that pull like, all right, I can see where this is going. I can see where the other shoe is going to drop because they may seem like they're happy, but they're not completely happy. And that's why I
Mm,
said there's a bit of an exception. Often the character does realize this and they're like, ugh, my life is miserable because of X. And then they get an opportunity to fix X. But
yeah.
sometimes it's like, no, I've got everything. And you're like, you really don't have everything, dude. Like you think you do, but I know better.
Yeah. Yeah. I just keep thinking the whole time you were talking about that, I was thinking of like Bilbo Baggins
Mm-hmm.
from The Hobbit. I
Yep.
mean, surface
Thinks he's got a
wise,
pretty grand life. Yeah.
right? And I wouldn't mind the life he had. I mean, come on. You're eating like 6 meals a day. You live in a cozy little house under the
Seriously,
ground. Yeah.
right?
So yeah, who needs all these like dwarves and dragons and stuff? Uh,
Oh, it's true. Yeah, no, and that's true. I mean, you can yank the person. There's not a reluctant hero is not necessarily a problem. Sometimes reluctant heroes can be difficult to get an audience behind because it can feel like the story is just sort of steamrolling them and they're just along for the ride. That tends to work better in vignette style stories. Like I would say The Hobbit is an example, although even that he grows a lot during the journey and there's a lot more depth to it than something like Alice in Wonderland, which is still a brilliant work, but really feels like she's just along for the ride. Or even something like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which relies a lot on the satire and the prose and things like that versus a white knuckle. I don't know if Arthur, I think that's the name of the main character, right? Is going to get what he wants. It's not really that type of story. So yeah,
yeah. No, actually, what's interesting about that, and I know this is an aside, we're on a rabbit trail a little,
it's okay. That's what you do when you talk about writing. It's all about rabbit
but
trails.
Bilbo is a character who is whole, and you break him by the end of the
Hmm.
story, and he's something different. Whereas most stories start with a character that's somewhat broken, and you're looking to fix them by the end of the story. So that's two different character dynamics right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, you could argue that, right? Because the argument is what did he gain by going on the journey? And I would
yeah,
say you can argue that he did gain something, but no, he's not as broken as say like Scrooge in A Christmas Carol or something
yeah,
like that,
yeah.
who isn't aware of how broken they are, but is very broken.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So how important actually is that awareness of the character when it comes to their development? Do they need to know that there's something missing in their lives?
I don't think so because we often don't have any self-awareness, right? And
Right.
sometimes
Me especially.
Yeah, right. Sometimes completely clueless characters are really fun to read, right? Like train wreck characters, or I even think of somebody like Emma from Jane Austen. I know I'm pulling references from wherever, but
Yeah. No,
um,
no, go.
you know, like I think that when you have characters that are unreliable narrators about themselves, there's a realism to that, and it's
Hmm.
fun as an audience to kind of psychoanalyze them and be like, why don't you see what you need? It's right there in front of you, right? And you're just
Right.
it can get very frustrating and fun. It's like
Yeah.
dramatic irony, right? Where
Yeah.
there's a dead body buried in the basement and you're like, why, when are they going to figure it out? I know it's
Yeah.
there,
Yeah. Yeah. So should you rely more on character or more on plot, or is there some balance in between you should be striving for?
Yeah, like if you have to pick one between one or the other, which that's not generally the best, but if you have to pick one or the other, always character in my opinion.
Yeah.
I can think of so many examples where we care about something because of the personality attached. I look at things like YouTube, not to criticize, I mean, I'm on YouTube, but
Yeah.
like there's a lot of people on YouTube, the influencers and things like that that are doing fairly mundane things, but people enjoy watching them because of their
Right.
personality, because of the way that they express things. It's a lot less easy to get people interested in really interesting data if it's told by Ben Stein.
Hmm. Yeah.
Great character actor, but you know what I mean? Like that's not, that's the whole point, right? The whole point
Yeah.
is that he can make interesting subjects not very interesting. And so I can think of countless examples of stories where the characters are great and the story is maybe just okay or whatever.
Hmm.
It's very hard for me to think of examples the other way. There are examples where people will say that they find it difficult to quite attach themselves to the character so much. I know, like, I don't really agree with this, but I know, like, Christopher Nolan, people argue that his films sometimes have a less of a emotional center and that people seem a little robotic. I don't really feel that way, but I'm very analytical, so maybe I'm just a robot and that's why. but even then, though, nobody's going to argue that you can't relate to what they want in life and the basic things about all of that, right? Even in a very plot heavy exposition crazy movie like Inception, there's
Yeah.
still at the heart of it a core and the very end of it where you're like, I don't know what kind of life does he have now, right? And they leave you hanging. It drives you crazy, right? Because
Yeah.
you want to know, you want that resolution, right? So
Yeah,
I
and I feel like you wouldn't if it were just a strictly plot driven film, you wouldn't necessarily have that feeling at the end, right? Like
no,
you're
I
curious
don't
about the
think so.
character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. If you didn't have that whole existential question of what is reality and has the person lost their reality? Did they actually get what they want? The ending would be fine, but it wouldn't stick with you the same
Yeah.
way, right? And I mean, you can even look at another example like The Social Network,
Yeah.
where it's so character driven, right? In the last shot of Mark Zuckerberg hitting that refresh button trying to see if the person will friend him, right? Is just
Yeah.
it's a very poignant moment and it works really well for that movie, which really is about, you know, what business arrangements and not figuring out your level of ownership in a business. It's like it's very like you would
Yeah.
think it's not necessarily the most interesting thing to make a drama out of, you know.
Yeah, yeah, but aren't we seeing a lot of that though? Like, Netflix is full of stuff like now. I mean,
Yeah.
Netflix is basically murder, but I mean, there's such mundane things. I was just watching there's a whole series about video games and the people who develop
Hmm.
video games. It is not interesting. Like the topic is
Yeah.
not all that interesting, but
Right.
I'm glued to it for some reason because these guys, these people who did these games in like the 80s and stuff they're real
Yeah.
characters. So what are some characteristics of a character that make them relatable and make them a good hook for the reader?
Yeah. So, often when we think of characters that are relatable or somebody that would become popular or people, like I say, a lot of people's ambition, it's like, I want to write the character that somebody would dress up at a con or something like that.
Hmm.
Sure. Um, there are a couple of tricks you can use, as it were, because I don't have any issue with cheating. I mean, writing is mind control after all. You use every
Yeah.
trick in the book. Um, but one that comes up a lot is the save the cat concept. which made popular by the book Save the Cat, where you have the character do something very admirable or noble early on. You probably don't want it to be as on the nose as they stop their car randomly to help a cat on a tree, because that would seem rather on, on the nose.
Yeah.
But there are lots of ways to implement it that aren't so obvious, like standing up for the less fortunate or inconveniencing yourself for the sake of somebody you don't have to be inconvenienced for. A big one now, because of the way social media works, is doing something kind or noble, but knowing nobody will know about it. Because
Yeah.
so many people do things now in order to dramatically, they're going to be taking a selfie while they give away charity and stuff. So,
Right.
so if you have a character that does something like that and they know there is no way anybody else will know about it, then
Yeah.
you're like, okay, that's a good person, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a good one. However, I know, and I mentioned that sometimes people are like, yeah, but my character's not a Boy Scout. They're not, whatever. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Being very capable. We love people who are very capable at something. This is a wish fulfillment because we would like to think that there's something we're really good at, or we would find the one thing we're really good at. And if we just honed in on it, we would just be amazing. And so if somebody else is able to do it, and I mean, obviously we all feel like we have our skills, but I mean, like, we're on like the world class level. Like, that's like really wish fulfillment, right? And so if somebody can do that and show you kind of like a Sherlock, right? And they're like, he's
Yeah.
so good at what he does, he can be kind of a jerk and kind of a sociopath, but you're very interested in him
Yeah.
because he's just so good at what he does, right?
Yeah.
And then the last element that I often works, of course, is humor. We like people that make us laugh. We enjoy comedy. And that's also a great way to soften somebody who is kind of a jerk. You can think of like a Doctor Strange who is very capable. Not only is he a capable surgeon, but they even give him that weird quirk where he like identifies music when it's written and stuff. Which is
Yeah.
actually something that I like to do too. So I really that was really funny. I was like,
Nice.
aha. He speaks my language.
You too
and
could be a
then
sorcerer,
he's also,
Daniel.
I'm sorry, what was that?
You too could be a sorcerer supreme.
No, no, no. Not at all. I'm certainly no brain surgeon, that's for sure. I'm more of the Sam than the Frodo in everybody's life journey, right? I'm not gonna,
yes.
I'm not gonna write your book for you, but I will carry you up the mountain and help you do
Oh,
it,
there
right?
you go.
So, but the other thing is that humor. So humor, capability, and being noble or admirable. Those are like the three components. At least one of them will do you well.
Yeah.
But two or more is better.
Yeah. Yeah. Two or more is always better, right? So, all right. Well, okay, let's dive a little bit into how AutoCrit helps with this sort of thing. Like, you've got built-in tools. You guys are all over the place. You can massage this thing from all sorts of directions, but
Right.
specifically for characters, like, what do you guys got?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Because that's one reason I wanted to talk about it, is because I've been really at work behind the scenes helping with this. So one of our tools we have, which is a really fun tool, it's called our Story Builder. It's really a brainstorming template, which allows you to, it helps you organize your thoughts. It gives you the different buckets of different things you might want to think about for world building, like the geography and the culture and things like that, and the premise. And then it has a bucket lists for all the different kinds of character archetypes. There's 8 we like to use in AutoCrit. I won't have to go into all of them right now. But the nice thing about it is, if you are kind of stuck and you're like, okay, I have a sense of who my main character is, I have
Yeah.
a sense of what the world is like, but I don't really know like who would be the antagonist in a situation like that. You actually can use it to generate ideas and get some instant feedback if you would so desire. And you can do that with the secondary characters as well and fill out your cast list. Of course, you don't have to do that. You can just use it as a template. If you use it as a template, it's all there next to your document as you're writing it. So it's all there nicely organized for you. Either way, right? We have
Yeah.
and the cool thing about it too is you can just sit there and you can just brainstorm and you can get a bunch of ideas. And all of the information that you include is going to be wrapped into that. So if you say it's a whatever dystopian society that's set on Mars or something, like it will give you characters that would make sense for that concept. If you say that these are the limited resources, it'll try to tie in the characters to things like that. So it's a great brainstorming tool for that. And
Mhm.
so baked into that though are arcs and things like that too. It's not just going to give you like it's not like one of those random character generators on the internet that's just going to be like they're Joe, just mashes a bunch of names and a bunch of physical characteristics. It's all based on sort of the things that I've been talking about. The protagonist needs to have either an admirable trait or a talent or something like that. If it brings up an antagonist, the three things for antagonist is imposing, demanding, and funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Funny is always good.
Yeah.
But imposing and demanding, because they have to be imposing to be a worthy obstacle that the character has to get past, and they have to be demanding in that the character needs to change to get past them, otherwise they would not be an obstacle.
Yeah.
So anyway, it'll give you those sort of suggestions when you ask it for it. And then on the flip side, let's go past the planning, let's go past the writing and everything. So let's imagine you just write everything and you want to get some feedback. Well, just like a good beta reader would do, it's going to look at your characters and it's going to say, all right, this is the kind of character arc they have. And these are the points where I noticed the character growth was in chapter 10. That was the inciting incident that kicked off their journey towards self-discovery. And Act 20 is when they reach their breaking point and whatever. And it's very handy because you might be like, wow, they do like a lot of development, like 12, 14, 16, and nothing really happened after that,
Yeah.
or what, you really want that all throughout the book, right? Nice little bell curve, where maybe 25% they have one big thing, 50% they have one thing, 75%, in a perfect world, right? And so it helps you with things like that. And also it gives you what it would assume is your cast list
Hmm.
based on our archetypes. So it back engineers, it finds the archetypes in your work, and then it gives you suggestions on, okay, if I'm right, and that is the archetype, that's who you intended, right? Because depending on how you write it, it may not be that obvious to find the archetypes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it'll be like your antagonist would be more imposing if, or maybe it should be more demanding, or I couldn't even find the antagonist. Maybe your work is a little bit looser than it needs to be, or you need to think about that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. So you could, so if I'm hearing this right, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but
Oh, I will.
sounds like I could bring my existing manuscript in and it would analyze it to find these characters for me. Is that part of it?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can go straight to that process. Like
Yeah.
there is the whole planning story builder side, but
Yeah.
let's imagine now you just, you have your ways and that's the way you want to do it, or you want to bring up something from the past. That is
Yeah.
fine. Yeah, you can bring your whole document as it lives now, your entire book. You don't have to chop it up into chapters, nothing like
Yeah.
that. You can bring in your whole book and hit a button and it will give you that whole report that's it. It's very simple.
Very cool. Yeah. I'll tell you, the thing that's missing in my life that I want most in the world is something that'll help me like go. I have 70 books. So I want something that's going to make it easier for me to do something like generate a wiki or something about my characters and that sort of thing. You think AutoCrit could help with something like that?
Oh yeah, because it'll give
He
you a
asked,
full
hopefully.
synopsis. Yeah, no, it would give you if for seven, yeah, no, it'd be a breeze because you could put your book in. It would give you a synopsis of everything that happens. It would tell you
Excellent.
who's in it. Yeah, all of that.
That's excellent. All right. Well, real quick run through, like what are some related things then that AutoCrit could do? Spinning off of character, what should we expect?
Yeah, no, we really are leaning into character whole hog next month,
Yeah.
right? So we're going to be doing some character workshops. I'm going to be doing a heroes and villains workshop coming up soon.
Oh, very cool.
Um, yeah. And you can find that on the Academy page. Um, we also always have our club sessions, and we're going to be discussing and giving feedback in those club sessions as well. As we do our updates, and I will be going over on our YouTube channel all of the features as it relates to character development the first Tuesday of April. I'm not sure when this is airing, so
Yes. I'm not either. So, but
No
if you
worries.
missed it, if they
If
missed
it's
it,
past the
yeah,
first
you'll
Tuesday of April, then you can go back and you can
just
find the
go
archive.
find it. Right. You'll find
That's
it.
when it's going up.
Where's that archive? Where is everything and how do people find you?
Well, you can always go to autocrit.com.
Hmm.
On YouTube, we do have our own channel. I want to make sure that I have it correct. Yeah. So you can go to YouTube and you can just search it, or you can go to /AutoCrit editing, and that is our channel URL.
Autocrit.com and youtube.com/autocrit editing.
That's right.
We got it. We got it. All right. Okay. Well, Daniel, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this. Character is such an important part of every story, every story. So, it's the one you can't miss. You can flub it
right.
on setting. You can flub it on even the whole like plot structure.
Oh, sure.
If you ain't got character, you ain't got nothing.
That's right.
All right. Thanks again, Daniel.
Oh, you're very welcome.
So, in the opinion of our esteemed colleagues here, what do you think makes a good dynamic character?
Yeah, we've talked about this before. I know Brandon Sanderson has his trifecta, which I have totally forgotten what competence is
Oh,
definitely one of
man.
them. I forget there's like three things. Competence, like being capable, is competence. Yes, that's definitely important.
Confidence?
But you don't have to have all three, right? But that's
Competence.
great. But
Yes,
one or two
yes.
of the things to help make a character likable. I know Daniel said like you should be kind and noble, maybe anonymously, and be funny. I certainly think that helps as well.
I like complicated
Yeah.
characters. I like characters that, like maybe on the surface you don't, they kind of come across as a little bristly, but as you come to know them, and sort of, I guess like people, like complicated. But I guess that's hard to, you risk them coming across as unlikable, but I don't know. I like unlikable characters. I'm usually the one that always likes the unlikable ones.
Well, sometimes, yeah, those are the characters people resonate with the most, it seems, Like they're, especially in like film, there's a lot of times there are characters who are on screen are, they're repulsive, but for some reason,
Yeah.
like that's the one you're following. That's the character. I mean, think about, like the Joker, for example.
Oh, that's a
Right.
fantastic character.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
you end up kind of rooting for him to the point where they actually have now got a film and a sequel where he's the protagonist of the whole story and is somewhat sympathetic and in a scary kind of way. Like you can almost see
Yeah.
yourself putting on clown makeup in his
Well, I
stead.
think that, like that's consistency. So consistency in a character. So whether they're kind at heart or, competent or incompetent, I think
Yeah.
that it's probably the consistency of the character. And I do really like it when I just read a book where they were talking about writing honestly. And what they meant by that was, obviously there's themes in books and the characters are the ones exploring those questions. And
Mhm.
so if you have a character that fully explores it, so you're allowing them to ask all aspects of the question, the good and the bad, and not coming to a conclusion except for one that makes sense for the character. And I think that's probably, in my opinion, what makes a really good character. It's not as easy as a checklist as
No.
Brandon Sanderson's
Well, yeah, I had to look it up
trifecta.
because I'm like, I
Yeah.
forget this. It's character scales to make your character interesting. So it's likability, how much your audience empathizes, competence, and proactivity, how much of the character is to achieving their goal. I do think all of those things are important. There's nothing more annoying than a passive
Yeah,
character. So
I agree.
I mean, it works in some instances, so I don't want to
Yeah.
make that a blanket
Yeah.
statement, but I do yell at passive characters quite often.
Well, if you make them the hero of their own story, doesn't that sort of make them active? Like, I guess that's kind of why it works
Yeah.
with the Joker being the protagonist, right? Like,
Oh, he's
the
very
hero of his own
proactive,
story, and he
right?
believes
Yeah.
that. So,
Well, and then sometimes they're there's a tendency to use passive
Yeah.
characters as exposition characters, And you think about like Watson from Sherlock Holmes. Like he's fairly passive becomes a bit more active in later books, but he's a fairly passive character, especially at the beginning. So, do you feel like you should rely more on character or more on plot to drive a story?
I think that's such a tricky question because I think plot is character and character is plot. Yeah, I think they drive each other.
I
And
agree.
I've probably talked about this before, but oftentimes I'm thinking of a story and I like, this would be cool. And then I have to think of a character, or I've thought of a character before in a story before, and they kind of have to like hang out in a drawer for a while and get married. You know what I mean? I think, character is really shown through action, right? And I think that's part of your plot. So the things that they are doing to achieve their goal and how they are going about them. So I think they're very, very much intertwined. Yeah.
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 Well, the character has to fit the plot, and the plot has to fit the character, right? Like, you couldn't put, I don't know, Mr. Darcy in like Indiana Jones. I mean, maybe you could. It'd be pretty interesting, but you'd have to make that character true to the plot, like in some way. Like, you couldn't just make him an aristocrat who doesn't get his hands dirty in an action adventure film. So
otherwise he'd probably be dead in act one.
So yeah, I don't know that. I know that, there's like plot driven and character driven, but I do think when like the books I love tend to be a nice blend of both. And I don't know that you could necessarily call them one or the other.
Yeah. No, I have this in my sticky in my room. I have character is action and action is decision. And I think that's really what plot is. So I think you got to marry those together.
I think that's pretty good. Yeah. Ape that, everybody. Write that down in your hand. I'm on board with everything you guys have said, because I feel like although I have written stories that didn't have actual characters, meaning like the environment was the story or something like that, like it's still a character really at heart. So it really was like the actions and decisions of this character are what drive the action. I put a lot of emphasis on characterization, to the point where now I'm starting to think that all writers do, and those who claim anything otherwise don't actually understand their own writing. So you may email us your complaints about that statement at writersincpodcast.com. But I think all writers are character writers, whether they realize it, acknowledge it, or even want it or not. So, Christine, I hope you know who we have coming up next week, because I don't.
I do. Up next week, it's 24-time U.S. Today and Wall Street Journal best-selling author Serena Bowen. Serena's previous books have been published in over a dozen languages with 15 international publishers. Her latest book, The 5-Year Lie, is her first suspense novel. It's going to be a fun conversation. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode, and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.